Now, since your hand is hanging down with your fingers that are basically going to pluck up this direction, even if you just use them the plain old way, since they're pointed a little bit toward your thumb, they're going to pluck more or less this way. But your fingernails, of course, are aligned more or less along this axis. So you have the nails going this way, the pluck direction going that way, and what you end up with is that the piece of nail that's on the string is basically coming really pretty much straight back. You have one of these kind of deals where, you know, the point on the string is in the middle there, and you have two different angles that end up making a straight line. And you can tell that by if you play on the 6th string, for instance, you don't get any scrapes. You just get a nice clean sound because you're coming straight back along probably one groove. Okay, so that in essence is what you're doing. Now, as you attack the string, if you had your fingers stretched out too far, then you might snag along the left-hand part of the nail. But what you do is you curve your fingers a little bit until you end up with the right-hand corner of the nail just snuggled up right against the string. And we may need a couple of close-ups of this. So the right-hand corner of the nail is touching the string right at the beginning of the stroke, and then the string passes over the nail until it gets to the middle, and then that's the end of it, and you're working from here using the finger as a unit. And you're plucking against your arm. I'll explain that a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to explain a little bit about how you know where to position your hand, because that matters quite a lot. Let's imagine now that these are 3 strings. Okay, now this knuckle, the one nearest your hand, let's imagine that you put it right up here somewhere. Then your finger is going to be sort of more or less that. And if you just swing this just very normally without doing much of anything with that, you're going to get something like that for a trajectory, which is exactly what you want. You hit this string, you don't hit those 2 strings, and everything's wonderful. Even if you move this down a little bit, let's say, you'll get a little bit more bent finger, which is what I was doing. Then you get a little bit more of a curve. You still miss these 2 strings, you hit that one, but you do have to move this a little bit to get the different strings. I think my proportions are a little bit off. Now what you don't want to do is what a lot of people try to do, and what doesn't work, is if you put this knuckle over here somewhere, in other words, not more or less over the string you're trying to hit, then here's the finger, goes along like that. Now you swing the finger just normally, and what happens? The circle is basically going to go this direction, but you don't want to do that. You can get away with it if you're doing an apoyando, but if you're doing a tirando, you can't get away with it because you're going to hit this string. So people tend to try to do that, and then what they do, because they don't want to hit the string, is they suddenly have to do a detour out of the natural trajectory of the string, and the way they do that is to bend this, maybe even to bend that going up, maybe even to bring the whole hand up to avoid hitting this string. That's what not to do. Doesn't work. Makes you big problems and causes all sorts of problems, because how you move these fingers is, of course, by pulling tendons and muscles on this side of your arm. But how you do this is by pulling tendons on the top of your arm. So if you're trying to pull this knuckle up and these in at the same time, you're pulling muscles up here and you're pulling muscles down here all at the same time. And all it ends up getting is very, very tight, tense wrist. So it's very important that your hand be positioned with this knuckle out far enough away from the guitar, far enough up that there's plenty of room for the finger to swing by, push this string down, and then get out of the way of that one without your having to do anything fancy with these knuckles and without having to move your hand. Okay, the important thing is to make sure that this knuckle is more or less over the string that you're trying to pluck, and that it's out far enough that there's plenty of room for your fingers to swing nicely. So then you'll get a nice swing. You don't have to do anything fancy to the finger other than just use it as a unit and move it back. Now, if you have your wrist too low or your back too far so that this knuckle is more over a string that's back, say 2 strings or 1 string or 2, 3 strings even from where you're playing, then what happens is if you would try to just push your finger down, it wouldn't work because the string's in the way. So you have no place to go. So then what happens is you'll tend to pull these knuckles and do what I was describing. You may even pull the whole finger up instead. And a lot of people play that way. And first off, one problem is, of course, it tends to make just the kind of snaps that we don't want anyway. And it's terrible for your hand. It's really, really, really super hard on your anatomy because these muscles pulling this knuckle down are, as we said, very independent. They work very well. Not these guys so much. This one is fairly independent, but these are not. You can try a little experiment. If you curve your fingers a little bit, try to hold the curve and then say pull on your third, your A finger. You'll find that the other two, your M and your little finger, will curl up and you'll have a hard time straightening them out. You could probably straighten out one or the other, but I give you my guitar if you can straighten out both of them and keep this one curved and under tension. You probably can't do it because these fingers are all reliant on some of the same muscles to move them and some of the same neurons to tell them to move. So they're very, very attached to each other. That's why you have a little bit more difficulty playing with the M and the A. So you want to make sure that this knuckle is pretty much over the string that you're going to play and that your fingers just move nice and loosely. There's sort of a trick question. Another question about just relaxation in general is you want to have your wrist really, really super relaxed and your hand just dangling there. Now, let's imagine that you put your wrist back too far or too low and you're going to play using these knuckles, which is sort of what you have to do if you do that. Now, let's imagine that with doing that, I'm going to also relax my wrist completely. Think what's going to happen. Very, very few people guess this because it's kind of a surprise. If you relax your wrist completely, which is good and what you want to do, but you've got your hand in such a position that you can't push from here and you have to pull from here, then what happens is you don't get any note at all. You just pull your hand right down on top of the guitar because the only thing that keeps that from happening is a lot of tension in your wrist. So if you find you have a lot of tension in your wrist, loosen it. And then if you can figure out how to position your hand, a lot of it is just where your wrist goes. Your arm is resting on top of the guitar, and what you're really doing is plucking, which kind of pulls your arm down on top of the guitar as you pluck a little bit. That's what takes up the pressure. Not any tension or holding your arm in place. Your arm is not held in place. It's just sitting there. Just lies there, very relaxed, hanging down very loosely, pretty well however it hangs. And then you just pluck using these fingers.